Somewhere, in a rented studio far from the rest of the band, a tape reel was spinning that Klaus Meine was never supposed to hear. It was 1985. Scorpions were finally breaking America after more than a decade of trying, and the drummer everyone thought they knew best was keeping a secret that could tear the band apart at the exact moment the world was falling in love with them. Nobody on that tour bus knew it yet, but somewhere in a rented room, a betrayal was quietly taking shape in the form of a cassette tape, and when it surfaced, it would come dangerously close to ending everything. To understand why this secret mattered so much, you have to understand where Scorpions had just come from. For more than a decade, 5 men from Hanover had clawed their way up from smoky German clubs to arenas across Europe, surviving lineup changes, language barriers, and years of being politely ignored by American radio programmers who filed them under foreign novelty. Then came Love at First Sting in 1984, and with it, the song that changed everything. Rock You Like a Hurricane. MTV put the video into heavy rotation. American rock stations that had never once played a Scorpions record suddenly couldn't stop spinning it. Fans who had never heard a word of German suddenly knew every syllable of that chorus. In January 1985, the band stood on a stage in Rio de Janeiro in front of hundreds of thousands of people at the very first Rock in Rio festival, sharing a bill with Queen, AC/DC, and Rod Stewart. Klaus Meine looked out past the first 100 rows and simply could not see where the crowd ended. Something shifted that night. Scorpions were no longer chasing America. America was chasing them. Every date on the calendar afterward felt like a countdown towards something enormous, and nobody in the band wanted to be the one who slowed it down. The grind that followed was relentless in a way none of them had experienced before. Radio interviews at 6 in the morning, photo shoots wedged between sound checks, flights that landed in one time zone and departed 12 hours later for another. Doc McGee, the band's American manager, kept the machine running with a discipline the band respected and occasionally resented, because every hour of the day now belonged to somebody else's schedule. Arenas across the American South and Midwest were selling out faster than the promoters could add dates, and a young opening act named Bon Jovi was watching from the side of the stage every night, taking notes on exactly how a European band had cracked the American arena circuit wide open. For Rudolf Schenker and Klaus Meine, the exhaustion was bearable because the songs were theirs, born together at kitchen tables and hotel desks over 15 years of partnership. For Herman Rarebell, something less comfortable was building underneath the fatigue. Herman was not just the drummer, and that distinction mattered more than most fans ever realized. Since joining the band in 1977, he had become one of its most valuable lyricists, sitting across from Rudolf and Klaus late into the night, shaping words that ended up on some of the band's biggest songs. He had helped write Rock You Like a Hurricane itself. He had helped write No One Like You. He understood the machinery of a hit as well as anyone in that room. But there was a quiet frustration underneath his confidence that had been growing for years. On stage, the cameras always found Klaus at the microphone and Rudolf swinging his guitar like a windmill. In interviews, the questions went to the singer and the founder again and again, while the drummer sat one seat down the table, waiting for a question that rarely came. Herman kept time behind them, night after night, watching the band's sound get credited in the public imagination to the same 2 names, even on songs he had bled over in some cramped hotel room at 3 in the morning. He loved this band. He had given it everything. He also wanted, badly and quietly, to be seen as more than the man keeping the beat. The touring lull came in the spring of 1985, a rare stretch of empty days wedged between the frenzy of American arena dates and the sessions the band was already booking to capture a live album, the record that would eventually become Worldwide Live. For most of the band, the break meant rest. Hotel curtains drawn against the daylight, phone calls home to Hanover. For Herman, it meant opportunity. He had ideas piling up, riffs and lyric fragments he had been humming into hotel telephones and scribbling on cocktail napkins for months, and he was tired of waiting for Rudolf and Klaus to find room in their schedule to listen properly. So, without telling either of them, he quietly booked studio time of his own. He brought in a trusted engineer he knew from earlier sessions and a hired musician friend who could sketch guitar and bass parts fast, someone discreet, someone who wouldn't talk. He told almost no one where he was going in the mornings, slipping out of the hotel before the others had even ordered coffee. What started as a handful of stolen hours became something else entirely. A set of real demo tapes, rough but unmistakably built in the Scorpions mold, recorded without a single member of the band's actual songwriting corps ever pressing record on them. The studio itself was small and unremarkable, tucked away from the tour's orbit, the kind of room with foam on the walls and a coffee machine that never quite worked right. Herman would arrive early, headphones already clamped over his ears before the engineer had finished setting levels, counting off songs that existed nowhere on paper yet, nowhere except inside his own head. He later admitted the feeling was electric and sick all at once. Electric because for the first time in years, he was building something from absolutely nothing, with no one looking over his shoulder, no argument about whose riff mattered more, no deferring to two names that always seemed to win the room. Sick because every single take reminded him he was doing this in the dark, hiding it from the two men who had built this band from a Hanover garage into a name now blaring out of car radios across the United States. He told himself over and over that he would play the tapes for Klaus and Rudolf the moment the songs were strong enough to speak for themselves. He told himself it was protection, not betrayal, that he was simply arriving at the table with something finished instead of half-formed. But late at night, alone in his hotel room with a cassette copy tucked into his jacket pocket like contraband, he knew exactly how it would look if anyone found out before he was ready to explain it himself. And someone did find out first, though it wasn't who he feared most. It was not Klaus, and it was not Rudolf. It was Doc McGee, the sharp-eared manager who had spent years shepherding this band through exactly the kind of fragile American breakthrough that could unravel overnight if the wrong story got out. He caught wind of one of the demos secondhand, a rumor passed along almost carelessly by a session player who had no idea he was carrying dynamite in his back pocket. McGee did not confront Herman directly. Instead, he went straight to Rudolf, because Rudolf was the one who had spent 15 years holding this band's identity together through every lineup change and false start, and Rudolf was the one who needed to know that a member of his own group was cutting tape behind his back at the single worst possible moment to test the band's unity. Rudolf's reaction was not an explosion. It was something colder and more unsettling than shouting. He said very little at first, just asked quiet, pointed questions in the hallway of the hotel where the band was staying, his voice low enough that a passing bellhop wouldn't have noticed anything wrong. Where had Herman been going every morning? Why hadn't he mentioned a single new song in weeks? Klaus, standing nearby with a room key still in his hand, felt the temperature of the whole hallway drop before anyone had even raised their voice. He had spent years building a songwriting partnership with Rudolf that the entire sound of this band depended on. A fragile balance of trust that let the two of them argue over a single lyric for hours without either one ever walking out the door. If Herman had gone around that trust entirely, quietly assembling full arrangements while the band's biggest American success was still unfolding around all of them, it meant the foundation underneath Rock You Like a Hurricane itself might not be nearly as solid as the charts made it look. When Herman finally stood in front of them, cassette in hand, the conversation turned sharp, fast. Klaus asked him directly, no preamble, why he hadn't simply brought the ideas to the table the way they always had. Herman, cornered and out of patience, stopped defending himself gently and said what he had actually been feeling for months, that he was tired of being the drummer who helped write hits nobody outside the band credited him for shaping, tired of watching two names take the spotlight while his fingerprints were all over the songs America was falling in love with. Rudolf shot back that secrecy wasn't collaboration, that a band who couldn't trust each other in a hotel hallway had no business standing together on the stages they were about to fill in front of thousands of strangers. Voices rose fast enough that a door down the corridor cracked open and quietly shut again. Someone said, out loud, the word that nobody wanted spoken during the best year of their entire career. Finished. For a few unbearable minutes, it was genuinely possible that Scorpions would walk out of that hallway as 4 men instead of 5, right as Hurricane was still climbing the American charts behind them, right as everything they had spent a decade building was finally paying off. Nobody moved for a long moment. Somewhere below them, muffled through the hotel walls, a maid's cart rattled down the corridor, utterly indifferent to the fact that a legendary rock band was quietly deciding its own fate 1 floor up. It was Klaus, of all people, who pulled the room back from the edge. He had heard the hurt underneath Herman's anger, and he recognized it, because he had felt a version of it himself years earlier, fighting for his own place inside a band built so visibly around Rudolf's vision. He suggested something nobody had offered yet in that hallway: play the tapes. Not as a confession laid out for judgment, not as evidence in some trial, but simply as music, the way any new song ever entered this band's world. If the ideas were good, they belonged to Scorpions, regardless of how strangely they had been born. If they weren't, the whole argument was pointless anyway. Rudolf, still simmering, agreed only because refusing would have looked like fear, and Herman, exhausted from carrying the secret alone for weeks, reached into his jacket, pulled out the cassette, and finally pressed play. What came out of those small hotel room speakers didn't fix everything instantly, but it changed the temperature in the air. There were rough hooks, half-formed choruses, a rhythm idea or two that made Rudolf's eyebrows lift despite himself, a bridge that made Klaus lean forward without meaning to. Nobody hugged. Nobody pretended the wound was gone in an instant. But Klaus admitted, grudgingly at first and then more warmly, that a couple of the fragments had real teeth to them. Rudolf, still guarded, said they were worth developing properly, together, in daylight, with everyone in the room from the very first note this time. It wasn't forgiveness so much as a truce built on respect for the work itself. The same thing that had held this band together since a Hanover garage decades earlier. Herman promised, and meant it, that he would never again build something this significant without bringing his bandmates in from the start. The tapes went into a drawer that night, some fragments later resurfacing reshaped almost beyond recognition, others forgotten entirely. But the crisis that made them was never repeated in quite the same way again. The tour rolled on because it had to. Worldwide Live captured the band at the peak of that hard-won, hard-fought unity just weeks later. A document of 5 men who had nearly splintered in a hotel hallway, now playing like they had never doubted each other for a single second. Rock You Like a Hurricane kept climbing American radio charts through the rest of 1985, and stadiums kept filling night after night, the crowds completely unaware that the band walking out under those lights had come within one hallway argument of not walking out together at all. Herman Rarebell stayed behind the kit through the rest of that extraordinary decade, still writing, still shaping hits that would carry into Savage Amusement and beyond. But he never again let ambition outrun trust the way it nearly had that spring. What almost broke Scorpions in a quiet hotel hallway in 1985 became instead one of the things that quietly reminded them why they had survived everything else the business had thrown at them. Not the songs alone, not the fame, not even the sound that was finally conquering America after all those years of trying. It was the fragile, stubborn loyalty of 5 men who chose, again and again, in hallways nobody else ever saw, to stay a band.